Sneak peek behind the curtain, I always take my thumbnail photos before filming a video, and for this one, the stack fell on me, so... Also, I've been trying to film this video all day, and my neighbours are renovating and I guess destroying their entire flat right now, and I'm sick of waiting, so I'm filming through the pain. If you hear power tools, they won't work you up as much as they've worked me up in the last, 7 hours. Right, this is a big stack. Let's run through them. Also, some of the books on this stack I'm really excited to talk about because I didn't do a dedicated video on them, but I really want to talk about them, so let's get to it. As always, this monthly wrap-up is in no particular order, so let's start with this. This is My Body Given For You by Heather Parry. Published by Haunt, who are an incredible indie publisher based out of Edinburgh, this is an amazing collection of short stories by the influential, wonderful, and disgusting Heather Parry. Her debut novel, Orpheus Builds a Girl, came out last year, published by Gallic, and now we have this, a collection of body horror tales. These are stories that are just disgusting. They wrench apart your bones and your mind, they suck you dry, and they leave you a withered husk, and I love them for it. This is a collection that explores the strangeness of the human body, the ways in which it can frighten us through things like disease, puberty, changes we didn't expect. There are so many odd things about our biology, and Parry explores them all through this. Watch my full review if you want more details. I try to read a new and previously unread Agatha Christie book every once in a while, as often as possible, and this month I read The ABC Murders. This is a Poirot book, and it took me by surprise because it's very different to not only other Poirot stories, but other Christie books in general, because this is far more a thriller than it is a murder mystery. Murder mysteries are inherently cozy things because they're like puzzles. This is not that. This is Poirot up against a serial killer, a guy, maybe, who keeps sending him notes around the time that he commits a murder. He posts them to Poirot, offers him clues but mostly teases him, and invites Poirot to try and stop him. Each murder is alphabetical. The first victim is a woman whose initials are AA, and the murder takes place in a town beginning with A, and as we go on. This is much more like a crime drama or a thriller than a cozy murder mystery. For that reason, it's not my favourite Christie book, but it's also not my least favourite either. It is really good. I just prefer when her murder mysteries feel cozier. A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. This is a real doozy. It's kind of similar to How to Kill Your Family or the film Promising Young Woman, where we have an unhinged, lovable and hateable female protagonist. In this book, our protagonist enjoys killing men. She is a serial killer of men, but she also enjoys taking a piece of each man that she kills and eating it. Maybe it's his tongue, maybe it's his liver, maybe it's a lump of his flesh, but she's a food critic. She's really famous for it. She has a column, she has 2 books out, she is a renowned food critic. And she's sick of men. Men always disappoint her. Boyfriends turn out to be shit. Co-workers let her down. And so she often ends up just having to kill them. The feminine urge to kill men for your own satisfaction. What makes this book dynamic and less cringe than it might sound is that it's really beautifully written in the first person. Because our protagonist is a critic and a newspaper/magazine columnist, she has a real, delightful, creative way with words. And so even though this is a novel written in the first person, it's also a written account from her jail cell, and it's written in a very creative way that makes her sound like an experienced columnist. You really feel like you're in her head and experiencing her skills and her talents, and I think that is a really important aspect to this book. I wrote a massive article about thrillers this month, so I read a bunch of thrillers, and another one that I read was The Maid by Nita Prose. This is a very good murder mystery style book. It has a lot of unique elements, such as its setting and its protagonist. However, the protagonist is autistic coded, and I'm not sure the representation is really there. Now, I am neurodivergent. You hear that? Do you hear that? The hammering, like, right there. I'm not going to stop. What did I say? Right, I have ADHD, but I'm not autistic. The two overlap hugely, and a lot of people have both, but I'm not autistic. I used to be a teacher. and I taught autistic children, and I had training on how to help diagnose, encourage, and teach autistic kids. I also have a lot of friends who are autistic. The representation in this is odd. Not so much because of how the protagonist behaves, but because of how she's treated by wider society. This is almost set in an alternate universe where no one's ever heard of not only autism, but any kind of neurodiversity. It's odd. Everyone seems to treat her like an absolute freak. The word autism is never used, she's only coded, but it's obvious, and it's been pointed out a lot by other critics. It's a weird one. That aside, this is a fun and dynamic murder mystery, set in a hotel where she is the maid, and she's caught up in it. And you feel really sorry for her because she's out of her depth, she's confused, she's overwhelmed by it all. There's certainly a sense that this book seems to patronize autistic people, which I don't love, but I still enjoyed it as a simple, cozy murder mystery. I'm very divided on this book. There's so much of it to dislike, but I really like murder mysteries, so I still enjoyed it for that. I still finished it, I still had a good time reading it. I was just intensely frustrated by its representation. And speaking of diversity and representation, I read my first Brandon Sanderson book this month. Now, I've never read him before because he's a Mormon and he went on a 2-year mission as a missionary. I do not like missionaries. I do not appreciate the concept of missionaries. Missionary work is religious oppression. It is a dark symptom and a tool of colonialism. Missionary work is repulsive, repugnant, disgusting. And so I took a stance years and years ago to never read Brandon Sanderson. He's also written blog posts and said really, really horrible things about the queer community, which I am a proud member of. There is a history of homophobia and transphobia in what he has said in the past. However, and this is really important, Brandon Sanderson has owned up to that. He's talked about it publicly, he's written about it on his website, he has apologized and even tried to make amends by including queer characters in his later novels. And he even speaks out against homophobia and transphobia within the LDS church. So, I have to respect that. I want to respect that. I like seeing the good in people, and so I read him. I read his first fantasy book, the first book in the Mistborn series, The Final Empire. And you know what? It's fucking good. I see why Brandon Sanderson is so beloved in the fantasy community. He's a very talented writer. He really understands writing. He understands how to write. Look, this is just hammering. There have been power tools for hours. I have a headache. Brandon Sanderson really gets how to write. Flow, plotting, character arcs, it's all exquisite. He should... Well, he has taught classes on story writing, specifically within fantasy, and you can see why. He's so good at world building and plotting and character writing. He excels at being a fantasy writer. In terms of the craft of fantasy writing, he's second to none. I recently finished The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. I am a huge fan of hers. I think she's exceptional. I've talked about her in the past. I've got more of her books to read. I just bought her latest book, A House with Good Bones. I'm going to read that very soon. This is her longest novel, I think. It's about 400 pages. And it's a book of American folk horror. It's about a woman who had a very, very elderly grandmother who was a nasty, twisted, evil woman who finally died over the age of 100. And our protagonist, Melissa, who goes by Mouse, has been asked by her dad if she can go take care of the house. It was a hoarder's nest, and so Mouse goes and lives there for a few weeks and slowly sorts everything out. But while she's there, she learns about her grandmother, the fact that she remarried Mouse's step-grandfather, who is a Welshman. He's a Welsh immigrant to the US who kept diaries and journals and had these weird ideas and beliefs about monsters in the woods, these folk terrors that exist, things that go bump in the night, and those things turn out to be real, and Mouse gets wrapped up in it. In the forest just outside this house, there are things, and they are frightening, and I really enjoyed this. I read and adored 2 Emily St. John Mandel books this month. I'm not going to say much about either of these because I did a dedicated video on the genius of Emily St. John Mandel and how these 2 books turned me into an absolute addict of her works. I liked Station 11 a lot, but I didn't think it was quite as good as people kept saying it was. novels, even though I loved its concept. The execution was fine. But here, with these two books, The Glass Hotel and Sea of Tranquility, she shows how she's a master of the craft in some really experimental, strange and exciting ways. Go watch my video to learn more. My previous video was on these 3 sci-fi books, 3 chunky epics that I loved for different reasons. A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine and Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie are 2 massive epic sci-fi novels. They are true space operas, which is a phrase I don't think I actually said in that video, but they are space operas, and they are good ones. These 2 novels have a lot in common because they are both about empire and the nasties and the evils of imperialism, but they come at it from different angles. This is very much Game of Thrones in space. It is about being an outsider on the inside at the very, very top of a massive empire, a woman who is an ambassador for a fiercely independent group of space stations who has ended up on the inside of an enormous empire's political system, and there is a mystery unfolding regarding her predecessor and his death, and her new role as ambassador in this incredible space empire. This is an amazing book about empire. As is this. Ancillary Justice won the Hugo Award, and the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and the Locus Award, and the Nebula Award. It won everything, and it's the only novel to have won all of those incredible science fiction and fantasy awards. And it's also a book about empire. But it's about an AI who used to be the AI of a ship and an entire army of soldiers within that ship, but is now one body, who is trying to take revenge on the very leader of the empire himself. It is about how all of this came to be, and how Breck, the protagonist, takes revenge. Do You Dream of Terror 2 is basically a coming-of-age story in space. It is about a group of teenagers who are on a 23-year mission from Earth to a new planet that's just like Earth but doesn't have people on it, and we need to colonize it to save ourselves from climate disaster. But these teenagers are going to spend 23 years in close quarters on this ship together, and shit's gonna go down. One of the books I was eager to talk about but just didn't make a video on, and now I kind of wish I had, is Bad Cree. This is a book by Canadian author Jessica Johns. Our protagonist is a Cree girl called Mackenzie. Mackenzie lost her sister Sabrina a few years ago. We learn more about how Sabrina died and memories of times leading up to her death as the book goes on, but when we first begin, Mackenzie has a dream about crows, and she wakes up with a severed crow's head in her bed. In the dream, she grabbed a crow and ripped the head off of it. And that crow's head from the dream has ended up in her bed, and things only get weirder from there, as her dreams start to meld into reality. And at one point later in the book, she realizes she's able to take things from real life, like her phone, into her dreams. But these dreams are of a time, a very important moment, before her sister's death. What does this memory have to do with her sister's death, and maybe her sister's afterlife? You have to read on to find out. But this is a fantastic supernatural horror thriller. It's horror in terms of its aesthetic, but it's not that scary. I would say it's more of a mystery thriller that uses supernatural horror themes to tell its story, and the fact that it's about a Native American group is really, really important. Much like the stories of Stephen Graham Jones, it's really cool that we're getting more Native American and Native Canadian, if that's the right term, writers and artists creating unique works of art. I loved this, and I urge people to go check it out. It's also a debut novel and an incredible one. There's now a car alarm going off. I'm having a bad day. I'm not actually, it's fine, but I'm a drama queen. Honeybees and Distant Thunder. This is a Japanese novel by Riku Onda. It was translated into English by Philip Gabriel, and I did a dedicated review of it. I really liked this book. In fact, I think it remains my favorite book in translation of this year so far. It'll definitely be on my best of year list when I get around to that at the end of the year. This is an incredible, again, kind of coming of age story about a group of young musicians taking part in a very prestigious international classical piano music competition. We have 3 protagonists, 2 guys and a girl, who are all in this competition against each other, but all know each other and get to know each other as the story goes on. It's a book about a lot of things, including the power of music and the way that it influences and can even manipulate our lives, and I thought it was so beautiful. It's a pretty big book and a slow burn, but it is also incredibly addictive. My eyes were glued to the page. All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is a sci-fi book, the first in a series of short sci-fi novellas that is really respected in the world of science fiction, and I liked it. I certainly liked its protagonist, its plot, its themes, pretty much everything that made it up, but I didn't love the writing. The writing felt too edgy, like it was being written by a 16-year-old. It felt a little bit YA, and it's not YA, it just has that tone to it. And I didn't love that, and it frustrated me. But I tried to push all of that out of my head to enjoy the fact that this is a really exciting sci-fi thriller about a robot that serves a group of humans that are investigating a new planet, and they're doing it on behalf of a company because corporations own all of space at this point in this series. But our murder bot has secretly removed an aspect of his mind that stops him being subservient and gives him free will, essentially, but he's done that in secret. The humans can't know, and it makes him a pretty unique element in their team. When another research team not far away goes silent, our team goes to investigate and find out what happened, and it becomes a really exciting action thriller from there. I just hated the writing. I recently made a video on these two incredible new Korean novels, Greek Lessons by Han Kang, and all I'm going to say about this is that Books and Bao wouldn't exist without Han Kang. The Vegetarian, Human Acts, and The White Book are all books that inspired me to create Books and Bao in the first place. I love her books. The Vegetarian was the first Korean novel I ever read, and it's so cool that we've got a new book of hers, Greek Lessons, and it's really good. It's about what language can do to us, to help fix us, to heal our wounds, and bring us together in existential and very human and social ways. It's beautiful. Walking Practice by Dolki Min, translated by Victoria Caudle, is a fantastic book about an alien on Earth who is trying to survive but does so by eating people. And it finds prey by using dating apps and disguising themselves as either a man or a woman as need be, and then hunting down and biting the heads off their prey. But this is a book about gender and the way that cis and trans people alike have to perform gender in order to survive in our modern day society, and our alien is a fascinating representation of that and a kind of exploration of that concept. It's funny, it's dark, it's got horror elements, but it's mostly an existential crisis in novel form, and I absolutely adored it. This will also be on my end of year list, I promise. The power drills have started again, but I really want to finish this video, especially because this is the book I want to talk about the most. I didn't make a dedicated video on it, and I feel like a fraud, so here are my thoughts. This is Our Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill. Before I started reading this, this was everything I'd ever hoped for in a novel. I'm really not exaggerating. This is a spiritual sequel to Frankenstein, written by a very young, incredible Scottish writer. This is also their debut novel, like Jesus. It's about Frankenstein's great niece. It's set in the 1850s. We only discovered dinosaurs relatively recently, and about 20-30 years after the first discovery by Europeans of dinosaur skeletons, our protagonist really wants to get involved in this scientific world. Her husband is a geologist. She's... Are you joking? Thank you. She herself is also part of the scientific community. She's been involved in journals and papers, and she's done art for them, which is really cool. But she and her husband are not very happy. He's really not a nice guy. And semi-spoilers, I guess, there's also a potential romance between our protagonist, Mary, and her husband's sister. Just gonna tease you with that. But while trying to make it in the world of science, especially archaeology and geology, Mary discovers the notes and journals of her great-uncle, Victor Frankenstein. She learns that he built a man out of body parts, and she wonders if she can do the same with a dinosaur. This is Frankenstein with dinosaurs. It is a spiritual sequel, which means it is a piece of historical fiction, it is gothic, it has all the tropes and trappings of Frankenstein, but it's about dinosaurs. It's not as intense and heavy as Frankenstein, it doesn't have the same linguistic heft and absurdity of language, which is not an insult. Frankenstein's my favourite book. See? I love Frankenstein. Best book ever. But this book is a little bit more grounded in its language. However, I really can't imagine a more ambitious sequel because it has dinosaurs in it. So check it out. I recently did a video on Yellowface. This book turned me into an R.F. Kuang stan. I didn't love the Poppy War. I thought it was fine. I didn't read its sequels, and I didn't read Babel, although I have now ordered it because of how much I loved this book. This is an incredible new thriller. This is the book that everyone's going to be talking about all through this summer, and rightly so. This is an amazing literary thriller. It's a heavy satire about the publishing industry, about social media, and most importantly, about cultural appropriation of the stories of ethnic minorities. Our protagonist is a white American woman who has seen very, very little success as an author, and her closest friend, but the two of them have never really been that close, was a Chinese American author called Athena Liu. She's a superstar. She's written multiple bestsellers, and at the beginning of this book, Athena Liu is celebrating the fact that one of her books has been picked up for a Netflix deal, so the two of them are out celebrating. But then, at the end of chapter 1, after revealing to June, our protagonist, that she's written a manuscript for what she hopes will be her best book yet, but she hasn't told anyone else about it, Athena dies choking drunkenly on a pancake that she just made. June is upset, she tries to save her, but she can't, she fails, and Athena dies. And so as she leaves her friend's apartment, June takes the manuscript with her. She finishes it, she polishes it, she edits it, she makes it perfect, she whitens it up a little bit, she sends it to her agent, and she becomes a sensation because of it. And this entire novel is about her being found out, or avoiding being found out, for the fact that she plagiarized a Chinese American writer and took a Chinese story for her own. This book is all about Twitter drama, it's all about cancel culture, it's all about the publishing industry and the racism and prejudices that go on in the background behind the scenes. It is scathing, it is satirical, it is dark, it is funny, it is scary. It is a perfect thriller, and I loved everything about it. Finally, another thriller that I read is this debut novel, which was also amazing, Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater. This is primarily set in a bookshop in Walthamstow in East London, and it's about two different protagonists who are two unlikable and annoying young women. One of whom is an edgy goth girl, whom I obviously related to. She loves death and she listens to true crime podcasts and she thinks everyone else is a weird normie. She's basically Wednesday Addams. And the other girl is a pompous and arrogant bookworm who dresses all cottagecore, and I related to her as well. And this book is about how the goth girl sees something in the preppy girl, something dark, and so she becomes obsessed and wants them to be friends. And you see this relationship, or lack thereof, from both of their perspectives. You watch with beady eyes as both of them change. You learn more about their pasts, their relationships to crime and murder, their relationships to literature, to London, to books, to everything around them. And Roach, the goth girl, slowly becomes more and more creepily obsessed, and it gets really intensely scary. And the title tells you that one of them is going to die, and it's probably going to be Laura, the preppy girl. But we don't know that for sure, so you need to read on and find out if it is her, how, who's going to do it. Is it Roach? Maybe, probably, could be, dunno. Read it and find out. Also watch my video on it. There you go, that was 19 books. I also read a manga. It's not here, I read it digitally. It was called Love in Focus. It's a really, really charming love triangle thing about photography. It was really nice. So go check all these out and support me on Patreon if you'd like. I'd love you to. Okay, thanks, bye. Subscribe for books.